Welcome. If you enjoy these stories, please like, share and subscribe. For a bit of fun, comment where you're from and what time you're watching this video. Now lie back, relax and let sleep consume you. The wilderness embraced us as we ventured deeper into its heart, the towering trees and winding trails promising an escape from the everyday. Our initial days were filled with laughter and the camaraderie of shared adventure, the rhythm of our footsteps, and the rustling leaves, our constant companions. On the third day I noticed it. A footprint in the soft mud near our campsite. It was larger than any of ours, the tread pattern unfamiliar. I pointed it out to the others, a silent question in my gesture. We examined it closely, a prickle of unease momentarily disrupting our cheerful mood. We dismissed it as another hiker, someone who had passed through before us. But the signs persisted. A freshly broken branch lay across our path the next morning, its snapped end still showing the pale wood beneath the bark. None of us remembered seeing it the day before. Later that day, we discovered that some of our food supplies were missing, small items vanishing from our carefully packed bags. We checked each other's packs, a silent accusation hanging in the air before we shrugged it off as carelessness. The feeling of being alone in the vast wilderness began to erode, replaced by a gnawing suspicion. We started to keep a closer watch, scanning the surrounding woods, our conversations becoming more subdued. One night, as we lay in our tent, the silence of the forest was broken by a sound just outside the thin nylon walls, breathing, slow, deliberate breaths, as if someone was standing just inches away, listening. We held our breath, straining to hear anything else, but there was only the steady rhythm of the unseen presence outside. We cautiously unzipped the tent and peered out into the darkness. Our headlamps cut cones through the night, illuminating the surrounding trees and undergrowth. There was nothing there, no sign of anyone, just the silent, watchful woods. The breathing had stopped as suddenly as it began. Paranoia began to take root, twisting our nerves into knots. We decided to cut our trip short, to turn back towards the familiar trails and the safety of civilization. The remaining days of our planned trek felt too exposed, too vulnerable. The next morning, we retraced our steps, following the trail markers we had diligently placed on our way in. But something was amiss. The markers were gone, or moved, leading us in directions we didn't recognize. Familiar landmarks were absent, the terrain subtly different. A chilling realization dawned upon us. Our route back had been sabotaged. Someone or something had deliberately altered our trail, leading us not towards safety but deeper into the wilderness. The broken branches became less random, more like subtle guides leading us further astray. The missing food now felt like a calculated act designed to weaken us. The forest seemed to press in around us, the trees taller, the shadows deeper. The feeling of being followed intensified, a constant awareness of an unseen presence just beyond the edge of our vision. We moved with a growing desperation, our initial enthusiasm replaced by a gnawing fear. We stumbled upon a small stream, hoping to follow it downstream towards civilization. But the stream twisted and turned, leading us further into the dense woods, away from any recognizable landmarks. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we found ourselves in a part of the forest we had never seen before. The trees were ancient and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The silence was profound, broken only by the frantic pounding of our own hearts. Then, from the deepening shadows ahead, them, faint, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniably there. Footprints in the soft earth leading away from us, deeper into the darkness. They were the same size as the ones I had noticed near our campsite days ago. We stopped, our breath catching in our throats, the chilling realization settling upon us that we were no longer just being followed. We were being led, and the path ahead stretched into an unknown and terrifying darkness. The trail stretched before me, a ribbon of earth winding through the vast wilderness. The initial days were a balm to my soul, the solitude a welcome respite from the noise of everyday life. The rhythm of my hiking boots on the dirt, the rustling leaves and the distant calls of birds were my only companions. Then the small things began to happen. A water bottle carefully placed in a side pocket of my pack vanished. I retraced my steps for miles, searching in vain, attributing it to a momentary lapse in attention. A few days later, my compass disappeared from its designated pouch. Frustration began to gnaw at the edges of my piece. The scratches appeared next, long, thin red lines on my forearm, as if traced by a sharp twig. I had no memory of brushing against anything that could have caused them. I examined my clothing, my sleeping bag, searching for a culprit, but found nothing. More scratches appeared over the following days, each one a silent question mark etched onto my skin. My GPS, my lifeline in this sprawling landscape, started acting erratically. It would guide me down paths that weren't on the map, lead me in frustrating circles, adding unnecessary miles to my journey. I recalibrated it multiple times, checked the batteries, but the malfunctions persisted, a growing sense of disorientation setting in. The feeling of being alone began to dissipate, replaced by an unsettling awareness. I would catch glimpses of something at the periphery of my vision, a fleeting shape between the trees, a subtle disturbance in the undergrowth. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. Yet the sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes following my progress, grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, while venturing slightly off the main trail to find a secluded spot for lunch, I stumbled upon something hidden amongst a dense thicket of bushes. It was a crude shelter, hastily constructed from branches and leaves, barely concealed from view. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of unease, compelled me to investigate. Inside the shelter, lying on a bed of dry leaves, were several photographs. My blood ran cold as I picked them up. They were pictures of me, pictures taken while I was sleeping. The angle, the lighting, they could only have been taken while I was inside my tent at night. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden silence of the woods. This was no longer a feeling of being watched. This was undeniable proof. I was being stalked. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface of my carefully maintained composure. I quickly left the shelter, my mind reeling, the images of those clandestine photographs seared into my memory. I hurried back to the main trail, my pace quickening, the sense of vulnerability overwhelming. Night fell, draping the forest in an inky blackness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I huddled inside my tent, the thin nylon offering little comfort against the unseen presence I knew was out there. Sleep was a distant luxury, my senses hyper-alert to every sound. Then it came, a soft sound outside my tent, just beyond the fabric, a subtle rustling, as if someone was moving through the undergrowth. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic beating of my own heart. The rustling stopped, the silence returned, heavier now, charged with an unseen presence. And then a whisper, faint, barely audible, but undeniably there. It was close, right outside the tent. It spoke my name. The drive into the woods was scenic, the anticipation of a relaxing weekend camping trip filling the car. We arrived at our reserved campsite to find a scene that sparked immediate questions. An old, stone-ringed fire pit sat in the center of the clearing, filled with charred wood that looked like it had been there for months. Scattered around were remnants of abandoned supplies, a tattered tarp, a rusty cooking pot, and a single mud-caked boot. We exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement of the strangeness. Assuming the previous occupants had simply left in a hurry, we chose a spot a short distance away and began setting up our own tent and gear. The afternoon passed uneventfully as we prepared our camp and explored the immediate surroundings. As dusk settled and the forest grew dark, an unsettling sound pierced the quiet. A scream, distant and muffled, echoed through the trees. It sounded like someone in distress, but it was too far away to discern any details. We paused our preparations, listening intently, but the sound did not repeat. We dismissed it as an animal, perhaps a fox or a coyote. Later that night, as we lay inside our tent, the screams returned. They were closer this time, more distinct, carrying a chilling note of human terror. They seemed to be moving through the woods, circling our campsite. Sleep became elusive, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Each scream seemed to draw nearer, the sounds of distress becoming more frantic, more desperate. The first light of dawn revealed a scene that sent a jolt of fear through us. Deep gouges marked the trees surrounding our tent, long parallel lines that tore through the bark, exposing the pale wood beneath. They looked like claw marks, far too large and deep to have been made by any animal we knew to inhabit these woods. Later that morning, while hiking along a nearby trail, we encountered a park ranger. We mentioned the abandoned campsite and the strange claw marks, seeking some explanation. The ranger's face grew somber as we described the location. He informed us that no one had been permitted to camp in that particular area since the previous summer. A family had gone missing then, their campsite found abandoned, their fate unknown. The ranger's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The abandoned supplies, the screams in the night, the unnatural claw marks, it all coalesced into a terrifying picture. We returned to our campsite with a profound sense of dread, the tranquility of the woods now replaced by an overwhelming feeling of vulnerability. The day passed with an anxious stillness. We kept a watchful eye on the surrounding trees, the deep gouges in the bark, a constant reminder of the unseen presence that might be lurking nearby. As night approached, a palpable tension settled over our camp. The darkness seemed to hold a different quality now, a sense of something ancient and predatory. The sounds of the forest at night, once comforting, now seemed menacing. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a shiver down our spines. We stayed close to the fire, the flickering flames offering a small measure of comfort against the encroaching darkness. Then the screams began again, distant at first, but carrying the same chilling note of terror we had heard the night before. They seemed to be coming from the same direction, moving closer. The sounds echoed through the trees, each scream more frantic than the last, painting a horrifying picture in our minds. The night stretched on, the screams drawing nearer, and the darkness surrounding our small campsite felt increasingly alive. The forest embraced me with a silence I had craved, a profound stillness that settled deep within my bones. The first day unfolded in tranquil solitude, the sun filtering through the leaves, painting dappled patterns on the forest floor. The night was equally peaceful. The only sounds, the gentle hooting of an owl and the crackling embers of my small campfire. The second night was different. A subtle sound disturbed the quiet around my tent, a soft crunching of leaves just beyond the thin nylon walls. I lay still, listening intently. The sound repeated, a steady, rhythmic pattern that suggested something pacing outside. My hand instinctively reached for my flashlight. I flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness outside the tent. The light caught a fleeting glimpse of something moving between the trees, a shape that was vaguely human in form. I held the flashlight steady, focusing on the area where I had the glimpse. The pacing stopped, then I them. Standing silently just beyond the edge of the light was a figure. It was barefoot, its feet covered in dirt. Its body, as much as I could see in the dim light, was also coated in grime. The figure was facing my tent, its head tilted slightly as if listening. It remained perfectly still, its presence radiating an unsettling stillness. I shifted the beam of my flashlight and the figure reacted instantly, its head snapping towards the light. It simply stood there, staring. I could not discern any features, just a dark silhouette against the deeper darkness of the trees. A wave of profound discomfort washed over me. This was not a deer, not any animal I recognized. This was something else, something deeply disturbing. I kept the flashlight trained on the figure, but remained motionless, its silent stare unnerving. I decided then and there that my week of solitude was over. Whatever this was, I wanted no part of it. The forest no longer felt peaceful. It felt menacing, watched. I would leave at first light, but sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig outside my tent amplified my fear. The image of the dirt-covered figure, its silent stare, was burned into my mind. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, I began to pack my belongings, moving as quietly and quickly as possible. The forest was still shrouded in a pre-dawn gloom, the air cold and damp. I stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack, rolled up my tent, my movements fueled by a desperate need to escape. With my pack secured, I started to make my way back along the trail I'd followed in. The forest was eerily silent, the usual morning chorus of birds absent. My senses were on high alert, every shadow seeming to hold a potential threat. I walked quickly, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves, the sound echoing in the stillness. Then I heard footsteps behind me. They were light, almost silent, but I could hear them, matching my pace, keeping a consistent distance. My heart pounded in my chest. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure was there, moving silently through the trees, its barefoot form blending with the shadows. It was the same figure I'd seen outside my tent, still covered in dirt, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. I broke into a jog, my pack bouncing against my back. The footsteps behind me quickened, matching my increased pace. I didn't dare look back again, focusing only on the trail ahead, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees becoming a blur as I ran. The footsteps behind me remained constant, a relentless pursuit in the pre-dawn light. I veered off the trail, plunging into the dense undergrowth, hoping to lose my pursuer. Thorns tore at my clothes, branches whipped against my face, but I didn't stop. I could still hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, moving through the underbrush with an unsettling ease. The chase continued. The forest, a maze of trees and shadows. The footsteps behind me seemed to be getting closer. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the almost silent padding of bare feet on the forest floor. I stumbled and fell, the impact jarring my body. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I glanced back. The figure was there, just a short distance away, its form clearer in the growing light. Its face was still obscured by shadow, but I could sense its gaze, its silent, intent stare. I turned and ran again, pushing myself to the limit. The image of the pursuing figure burned into my mind. The footsteps behind me continued, relentless, drawing nearer with each stride. The forest stretched out before me, an endless expanse of trees and shadows, offering no escape. The sound of the pursuit was almost upon me. The trail meandered through the dense forest, sunlight dappling through the canopy above. We walked hand in hand, enjoying the quiet beauty of the national park, the only sounds our footsteps on the soft earth and the occasional chirping of birds. We had planned a leisurely day hike, hoping to find a secluded spot for lunch. We veered slightly off the main path, drawn by a barely discernible break in the trees. There, nestled amongst the undergrowth, stood an old cabin, its wooden walls weathered and crumbling with age. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. Curiosity tugged at us, leading us towards the dilapidated structure. The door hung loosely on its hinges, groaning as we pushed it open. The interior was dim and dusty, the air thick with the scent of decay. A single room, sparsely furnished with broken chairs and a rickety table, lay before us. On the table, an unsettling scene unfolded. A plate held the remnants of a meal, dried scraps that looked like they had been left unfinished. Beside it, a rusty fork lay askew. In a corner, a dusty sleeping bag was rolled out, as if someone had been using it recently. Yet the cabin exuded an air of abandonment that suggested it hadn't been occupied for years. We exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement of the strangeness. The half-eaten meal and the sleeping bag hinted at a recent presence, contradicting the overall state of decay. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. We decided to set up our picnic a short distance from the cabin, a sense of discomfort preventing us from lingering too long inside. The afternoon passed uneventfully as we ate our lunch and enjoyed the surrounding nature, but the image of the cabin and its contents remained in the back of my mind. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we started to make our way back towards the main trail. We chose a spot to set up our small tent for the night, a little further away from the unsettling cabin. The forest grew quiet as darkness descended, the only sounds the gentle chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then it shattered the stillness. A scream, raw and filled with terror, echoed through the trees. It sounded close, too close. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests, straining to discern the source. The scream repeated, this time followed by a frantic shout, a man's voice filled with panic. The words, though distorted by the distance, were chillingly clear. "Someone has been in my home." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My blood ran cold. The abandoned cabin, the half-eaten meal, the sleeping bag. It wasn't abandoned after all, it was someone's home, and they knew someone had been inside. We lay silent in our tent, the thin nylon offering little comfort against the unseen presence in the darkness. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, the usual night sounds muted, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. The man's shouts did not return, but the chilling words echoed in my mind. Had he seen us? Did he know we had been inside his cabin? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The rest of the night passed in fitful, uneasy sleep. Every rustle of leaves outside our tent, every snap of a twig amplified our fear. The image of the crumbling cabin, now imbued with a sinister presence, haunted my thoughts. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the trees, we packed our belongings quickly and quietly, a desperate urge to leave this place propelling our movements. We didn't speak, our shared fear a silent language between us. We made our way back towards the trail, our pace quick and our eyes scanning the surrounding woods. The cabin stood silent in the distance, its weathered walls holding secrets we no longer wanted to uncover. As we reached the main trail and began our trek back towards the trailhead, a sound reached our ears, faint but distinct, carried on the morning breeze. It was a sound that made the blood run cold, a sound that suggested we had not left the woods or its inhabitant behind. The sound of someone, somewhere in the dense forest, methodically sweeping away footprints. The trail wound through the silent forest, sunlight filtering through the dense canopy. I walked with a steady pace, enjoying the solitude of my trek, the only sounds my boots on the packed earth and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then lying in the middle of the path, a small, brightly colored child's shoe. It looked out of place, a splash of vibrant color against the muted tones of the forest floor. I paused, examining it, a faint furrow in my brow. There were no signs of anyone else on the trail. As I continued, I found more. A small patterned shirt, neatly folded as if dropped intentionally. A little further on, a child's backpack, its straps tangled in the undergrowth. Then, a well-loved stuffed toy, its fur matted with dirt. The items were scattered as if someone had been fleeing, shedding belongings in a desperate hurry. A knot of disquiet tightened in my stomach. This was no longer just a peaceful hike. Something was not right. The scattered belongings painted a picture of distress, of a hurried escape. I scanned the surrounding woods, a sense of unease growing with each step. The trail opened into a small clearing, and there, standing perfectly still among the trees at the far edge, was a figure. It was tall and slender, its form indistinct in the dappled sunlight, but its posture was unmistakable. It was facing me, standing completely motionless, as if observing my approach. My heart began to beat a little faster. I stopped, studying the figure. It did not move, did not acknowledge my presence in any way, simply stood there, a silent sentinel amidst the trees. There was something unsettling about its stillness, its unwavering gaze. A wave of apprehension washed over me. I decided to turn back, to retrace my steps, to get away from this place and its unsettling discoveries. I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping the path behind me, and then standing there blocking my retreat, was another figure, identical to the one in the clearing, tall and slender, its form indistinct, its posture perfectly still. It was facing me, its silent gaze fixed upon me. I stood frozen, caught between the two figures. The clearing was behind me, the trail ahead blocked. They did not move, did not make a sound, simply stood there, observing me with an unnerving stillness. I glanced back at the figure in the clearing. It had not moved. It remained perfectly still, its gaze unwavering. I turned back to the figure on the trail. It too remained motionless, blocking my path. The silence of the forest seemed to amplify, pressing in on me from all sides. The sunlight filtering through the leaves no longer seemed welcoming, but rather a stark illumination of my predicament. I looked from one figure to the other, a growing sense of dread washing over me. They were identical, their stillness absolute, their presence inexplicable. I was trapped, surrounded by these silent, watchful figures. The air felt colder now, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The leaves rustled softly in the breeze, a sound that now seemed almost menacing. The figures remained, their silent, unwavering gaze fixed upon me. I stood there, caught in their silent vigil, the path ahead and behind blocked, the vast wilderness stretching out around me, offering no escape. The forest had been our haven for the weekend, the scent of pine and damp earth a welcome change from city air. The previous day had been filled with laughter around the campfire, stories told under a canopy of stars. We had settled into our tents, the quiet of the woods lulling us to sleep. The morning arrived with a subtle shift in the forest sounds, a noticeable absence. Mark's tent was empty, his sleeping bag neatly rolled up inside. He wasn't by the extinguished fire pit, nor anywhere within the immediate vicinity of our campsite. A knot of worry tightened in our chests. We began searching, calling out his name, our voices echoing through the trees, unanswered. We scoured the area around our tents, checking the nearby stream, any place he might have wandered. The forest remained silent, offering no clues to his whereabouts. As our search radius expanded, pushing deeper into the woods, we stumbled upon something we hadn't noticed before. A dark opening in the base of a rocky outcrop, partially concealed by thick undergrowth, a cave entrance. We had explored this area the previous day, or so we thought. Yet this gaping maw in the earth seemed new, unfamiliar. A sense of apprehension mixed with a sliver of hope drew us towards it. We cautiously approached the entrance, the air growing cooler as we neared the darkness within. The opening was narrow, forcing us to enter one at a time, the sunlight fading behind us as we ventured into the unknown. The cave was damp and smelled of earth and something else, something faintly metallic. Our eyes struggled to adjust to the gloom. As we moved deeper, the beam of my flashlight illuminated something on the cave floor, a familiar red baseball cap. Marks. A wave of dread washed over us. We continued further, our steps hesitant, the silence of the cave amplifying the sound of our breathing. Then we saw it. Mark's backpack, lying discarded against a wall, its contents spilling out onto the rocky ground. His water bottle, his hiking boots, his phone, all there, abandoned. A sudden sound echoed from the depths of the cave. A scraping, dragging sound, followed by a low guttural noise that seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath our feet. It came from the darkness further inside, a place our flashlights couldn't reach. The realization hit us simultaneously. We were not alone in this cave, and whatever was deeper within had our friend. A primal fear gripped us, a silent understanding that we had stumbled into something ancient and malevolent. The darkness ahead seemed to pulse with an unseen presence, and the scraping sound began again, this time a little closer. The mountain air was crisp and clean as we started our hike, the panoramic views stretching out before us, a reward for the steep climb. Our group moved with an easy camaraderie, the silence punctuated by the crunch of our boots on the rocky terrain. On the second day, a subtle awareness began to creep into our collective consciousness. A fleeting glimpse of a figure in the distance, far behind us on the trail. We paused, ostensibly to admire the view, and the figure stopped too. A dark silhouette against the distant landscape. We continued our ascent, and the figure remained, a constant presence at a distance. We made several more stops throughout the day, each time noting the figure, mirroring our actions, never getting closer, never disappearing entirely. Its form remained indistinct, too far away to discern any details, yet its consistent presence was undeniably unsettling. We exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement of the strange follower, a shared feeling of something not being quite right. As dusk approached, we found a sheltered spot to make camp. We worked efficiently, setting up our tents and preparing a simple meal. As a precaution, given the unusual presence we had observed throughout the day, we decided to rig a tripwire around the perimeter of our campsite. It was a simple strand of thin cord tied to a few strategically placed rocks and trees, designed to make a noise if anyone approached our tents during the night. We settled into our sleeping bags, the darkness enveloping the mountainside. The night was quiet. The only sounds, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant hoot of an owl. Sleep came fitfully, a sense of unease still lingering from the day's silent follower. Sometime in the middle of the night, a sharp snap echoed through the stillness. The sound was distinct, unmistakable, the sound of our tripwire breaking. We awoke instantly, our hearts pounding in our chests, the darkness around us feeling suddenly more menacing. We cautiously emerged from our tents, our flashlights cutting beams through the night. The tripwire lay broken on the ground, exactly where we had placed it. We scanned the surrounding area with our lights, searching for any sign of what might have triggered it. There was nothing, no animal tracks, no sign of a person. The only marks on the soft earth were our own footprints from setting up camp. Then one of us noticed them. Leading away from the broken tripwire, heading back into the dense forest, were footprints. Deep footprints, far larger than any human foot, and bearing a strange three-toed pattern. The impressions were clear and deep, as if made by something with significant size, and we followed the prints with our flashlights, the beam illuminating the strange, inhuman shape pressed into the earth. The footprints continued into the darkness, leading us away from the safety of our campsite, deeper into the silent, watchful forest. The mystery of the silent follower from the day now took on a far more terrifying dimension. The broken tripwire and the inhuman prints spoke of a presence we could not understand, a presence that had breached our perimeter in the dead of night and left behind a chilling, unanswered question. The early morning fog hung heavy in the air, a dense white blanket that muffled the sounds of the awakening forest. I set out on my usual trail run, the cool, damp air filling my lungs with each breath. The solitude of the early hour was always a welcome escape. As I moved through the trees, my footsteps a soft rhythm on the dirt path, I became aware of another sound. Footsteps. They matched my pace, the cadence of their impact mirroring my own. I glanced around, peering through the fog, expecting to see another runner emerging from the mist. The fog was too thick, obscuring anything beyond a few feet. I continued running, the footsteps still there, a constant echo of my own. Assuming it was another early riser, I considered calling out a greeting, but the silence of the fog felt profound, almost sacred, so I refrained. The sounds continued, mile after mile, a persistent presence on the trail. As the run progressed, I noticed a subtle change in the footsteps. They seemed to gain a resonance that was different from the light, quick steps of another runner. They sounded heavier, as if the person was larger, or perhaps wearing boots. The distance between us seemed to decrease. The footsteps were no longer just matching my pace, they were getting closer, the sound of their impact growing more distinct. A prickle of discomfort ran down my spine. The fog still concealed everything, the unseen presence behind me, the only other entity in my world. I tried to increase my speed, pushing harder, my breath coming in sharper gasps. The footsteps behind me matched my increased pace effortlessly, maintaining the same unsettling distance. The feeling of solitude had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of being followed, of being pursued by something unseen in the fog. The trail seemed to stretch on endlessly, the dense trees and swirling mist creating a disorienting landscape. The footsteps remained my constant companion, their sound growing ever so slightly heavier, ever so slightly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the trailhead. The familiar wooden sign marking the start of the trail emerged from the fog. I slowed to a walk, my legs aching, my lungs burning. I stopped, turning back to look down the path I had just run. The fog still clung to the trees, obscuring everything. There was no other runner in sight. I scanned the dirt path, searching for any sign of the person whose footsteps had shadowed my entire run. There, imprinted clearly in the damp earth, was a single set of footprints, my own. The tread pattern matched the soles of my running shoes. There were no other footprints on the trail, leading in either direction, only mine. The fog remained silent, the forest still, the mystery of the matching footsteps unanswered. The weekend hiking trip had been everything I had hoped for. Time away from the distractions of everyday life, just me and my son, forging a stronger connection amidst the beauty of the wilderness. We had spent the day exploring the trails, sharing stories, and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. As evening approached, we set up our small tent in a secluded clearing, the surrounding trees providing a sense of peaceful isolation. We built a small campfire, the flickering flames casting dancing light across our faces as we cooked our dinner. The night air grew cool, and we huddled closer to the warmth, the silence of the forest enveloping us. Later, as the fire began to die down, casting the edges of the clearing into deeper darkness, my son pointed towards the tree line. His arm was outstretched, his finger aimed at a spot just beyond the reach of the firelight. He seemed intent, his gaze fixed on something unseen. I followed his line of sight, but saw nothing but the dense black shapes of the trees. I smiled reassuringly, attributing it to an overactive imagination fueled by the tales we'd shared earlier. I suggested it was just the way the firelight played with the darkness, creating tricks for our eyes. He remained silent, his gaze still fixed on the same spot. We eventually retreated to our tent, the darkness now complete. I drifted off to sleep quickly, the exhaustion of the day's hike taking its toll. The next morning the forest awoke with the gentle chirping of birds. As I unzipped the tent, the sight that greeted me sent a jolt of cold fear through my body. Surrounding our tent, imprinted clearly in the soft earth of the clearing, were tracks, large tracks, undeniably human in shape but far bigger than my own or my son's, and they were barefoot. The size of the prints was unsettling, but the fact that they were made by bare feet out here in the rugged wilderness was deeply disturbing. I nudged my son awake, pointing silently at the tracks encircling our tent. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. The tracks led from the edge of the forest, circled our tent completely, and then continued back into the dense trees, disappearing into the undergrowth. There were no other tracks, no indication of where the person had come from or where they had gone, other than back into the depths of the woods. We examined the prints closely, their size and the clear impression of bare feet sending a shiver down my spine. I thought back to the previous night, to my son's pointing finger and his silent gaze into the darkness beyond the firelight. My dismissal now felt foolish, perhaps even dangerous. We packed up our campsite quickly, a sense of urgency replacing our earlier leisurely pace. The forest no longer felt welcoming, but rather held an unseen presence that had come right to the edge of our sleeping space. As we hiked back along the trail, I couldn't shake the image of those large barefoot prints surrounding our tent, leading back into the silent, watchful woods. The feeling of being observed remained, a constant prickle on the back of my neck, long after we had left the clearing behind.